Welcome back to That's a Good Word. I'm your host, Wilson Paris. This podcast is designed to assist and equip Christians through advice from people in ministry. And if you are blessed by our content, please feel free to like and subscribe. Today we are joined by Candie. She works with Child Evangelism Fellowship. She was also a missionary in South Asia, in a Muslim country, for almost a decade. So, Candie, thank you so much for coming on. Really, really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So what we're going to talk about is we'll kind of dive into your story, and then also after that, we'll kind of go into what you're doing now. But just starting right off with your time as a missionary, how you got started doing that, kind of your testimony, and then your time as a missionary.
Okay. Yeah. I would say even before I was a Christian, I was interested in other cultures. I remember having books about other parts of the world and little dolls from different parts of the world. And so I feel like that was something that God was, giving me that interest in my heart, even before I was a believer. And then just going to church, my favorite parts of church were mission friends and GAs. I loved learning about missionaries in different parts of the world. And then just over time, it was more of just a gradual call to missions. I can't say there's like one specific time or day that the Lord called me to be a missionary, but just as I continued to learn about missions, and then attending North Greenville, where there's a huge emphasis on missions on campus, and the influence of Dr. Mitt White. Also, a big part of that was reading John Piper's book, Let the Nations Be Glad. Like the Lord just used all those things and brought me to the point where I knew that, that was what he was calling me to do. And there's nothing else that I wanted to do with my life.
And so that's really good. And Alan McWhite's still there. He still works at the missions department, and he's a great guy. And when you say that there's that emphasis on missions to go into it, was it after North Greenville that you decided you were going to become a missionary? Was it at North Greenville?
No, I think it was before that. Like I said, there wasn't a specific time that I felt that call, but I think going into North Greenville, I knew that I wanted to be overseas one day.
Mm-hmm. And so you studied at North Greenville, and then you went to the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. Did you study missions there as well?
No, actually, so North Greenville was a Christian Studies major.
Right.
And then at Southern, I just only did 1 year. And so I kind of just got the basic classes in.
Right. After that, and then you went to South Asia after that. Is that correct?
No, after that, the reason I didn't finish seminary is because my dad was diagnosed with cancer.
Okay.
And so I moved back to the Greenville area to be with my family during that time. And then I was here for about 5.5 years. And then he passed away. And then I went to South Asia.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. So you go to South Asia. Talk about your experience there and the time you spent there. Just kind of maybe starting from the beginning.
Yeah. So I had done a lot of short-term mission trips, from high school through college, and had traveled to all different parts of the world, pretty much everywhere except for Asia. And, never really imagined myself in Asia. Didn't feel a strong interest in Asia. Was feeling more interested in Africa or South America. But when I was invited to look at jobs that the IMB had open, the Lord just really spoke to me that weekend as I looked through job descriptions and saw the need in South Asia, and could see that the Lord had gifted me in certain ways that would help meet the needs that they had. And so I moved to South Asia and had never visited there before. And so
was there a culture shock a little bit?
I would say the biggest culture shock I had was language school.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
School in South Asia is not like school in America.
So when you got to South Asia, your exposure to the language, that was your first time being exposed to the language?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so it was just, in language school, it's not in South Asia, in school in general, it's not really, it doesn't really show respect to teachers when you ask questions.
Okay.
But, in America, we're encouraged to ask questions in our classes. Right. And so I would ask questions to my teachers, and it would get them, frustrated or embarrassed. And I didn't realize I was making them frustrated and embarrassed, and I was getting frustrated. And so that was probably my biggest culture shock.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And so you started there and you start to get into the area. Did you find being it was a Muslim a highly Muslim populated area, was there a lot of hostility, at least towards the gospel when you started going in there and working?
The country that I was in, but I would say really all of South Asia, it's very normal to have spiritual conversations. People are not offended in any way when you start talking about spiritual things. And so actually, I feel like it was much easier to have spiritual conversations there than it is in America.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah. No,
Sometimes people in America, I guess there's a standoffish type attitude
yeah. Yeah.
towards like you're challenging what I believe, really.
Right. Right. But there's so many religions represented in South Asia. And so, to talk about Islam or Hinduism or Christianity, Buddhism, it was just kind of it was normal to ask somebody, what religion are you?
Right.
It wasn't offensive. And then but most people had never met a Christian and didn't know anything about the Bible. And so they're also very curious people, I would say, in South Asia. And so just a curiosity to know a Christian, to know about the Bible. It was just really, yeah, it was really refreshing. They weren't very eager to convert to Christianity, but they were curious to know about it. And as far as hostility, I mainly worked with women, and I can only really think of one time when one girl like really got in my face and wanted to debate, what we were talking about. So men could have a different experience than I did, but the it's not like China where the government's like watching you or out to like find you, and there are terrorist groups within the country, extremist groups that didn't want really any foreigners there, basically equating being a foreigner to being a Christian, and
Right.
so they would do things to try to scare foreigners out of the country. So I never personally felt like I was being targeted by a terrorist group, but there was a season where things were rough and we had to kind of lay low a little bit. Just, being a foreigner and not,
Well, I
it's,
mean, just out of curiosity, what would they do in terms of like, was it scare tactics more than anything?
well, yeah, there was one year where several foreigners were killed by extremist groups.
Wow.
And that had never happened before. Like actually normally where I was, foreigners are treated as an honored guest. And so for the most
Right.
part, in my experience there, I was treated as an honored guest. I was invited into people's homes. I was given their very best, even if they had nothing. I would be in line at the airport and they would pull me to the front of the line because I was a foreigner. It's really humbling, especially considering how Americans treat foreigners so poorly in our country. But I was treated as an honored guest in their country for the most part. And then in 2016, there was, so leading up to 2016, there was a couple individual murders that happened, foreigners that were murdered, and that was very shocking. And then uh, July 1st of 2016, there was a pretty major terrorist attack where a group came in to a restaurant that was known for being frequented by foreigners and took everyone hostage and did not, if you could quote a verse from the Quran, they would release you. And if you couldn't, you were beheaded.
Wow.
So, and that was like less than a mile from my house. And it was a restaurant that I also would go to sometimes. And so it was very, during that time, we just had to be more careful about being out in public. And when we were out in public, knowing where exits were in buildings in case we needed to get out in a hurry. But thankfully, I would say that was kind of the pinnacle of the tension there during my time. And after that time, the government really cracked down on terrorism and started seeking out where terrorists were hiding out in the country. And so actually things got much more peaceful after that time. And so that happened about 4 years into my time there. And so, I would say the last 6 years there were much more peaceful than the first 4, for sure.
So what you were dealing with is more, it was an outside influence that was really showing the hostility. So the people you were working with were very curious for the most
Mhm.
part. Um, I guess maybe for people that might not know, the kind of the belief systems you were dealing with, maybe Muslims specifically, what they believe that's
Mhm.
different from Christianity, and
Mhm.
then maybe after that we'll talk about how you kind of go about talking with people. But what are the Muslims and the people that you worked with? What was their belief system? What was different about it from being a Christian?
I mean, it's definitely a works-based salvation, and there was also no guarantee. It was kind of like, there's these things that you can do, and hopefully, if you do them, you might get to go to heaven. And so, there was no, and it was more based on fear. Everything that people did was more based on fear, and not, not love for Allah, but fear of Allah. And so, but really, what I did when I talked with people, and again, it may be different. How men discuss in dialogue in South Asia could be different than how women do. But I chose just to know the Bible and to share the Bible, and not get into debates with people, but just listen to them and what they said when they could tell me what the Quran said or what they believed, and then I would share what I believed. But I didn't really get into I didn't normally get into debates. I would just share the gospel. One of the main beliefs in Islam is they do offer a yearly sacrifice
Mm.
still. And so, it was one of the things that I would pull out is that, these sacrifices that you're making every year, this cow that your family is sacrificing, or this goat that your family is sacrificing, isn't the blood of that animal is not enough. Because for one, you and I are not animals. We need the blood of a perfect person, and that's why God sent Jesus. A lot of times I would go about it that way.
Did they kind of resonate with that? Was there knowing that the Muslim religion is more of a fear, this idea to them that there's a loving God that sent his son to die for us, which seems to be foreign in the Muslim belief. Was it something they were kind of open to, kind of shocked by, but more receptive to? I imagine. I don't know. I mean, them growing up as Muslims, it'd be difficult to receive it, but it sounds like it would be a better alternative at least.
Right, right. I know that they did, like I said, I mean, their concept of a loving God was not there. That was not a part of their belief
Hmm.
system. And, I remember a lot of times I would have people over to my house, and I had a Bible verse in my house hanging on the wall that said it was from Jeremiah, "I've loved you with an everlasting love." And I remember, having people even take picture of that on my wall, and just like, oh, that's such a beautiful verse,
Wow.
even having, I think one time I had a calendar, like a pocket calendar that had some Bible verses in it, and the girls, university girls, looking at that one time and and just loving the verses that were in that. So
Yeah, that's really interesting. One thing that we may have talked about, I remember, I think Linda told me the story that was interesting is if you're feel free about sharing it. You had a driver
mhm.
and you helped lead him or her to the Lord, and then they went back to their village. Can you talk about that story a little bit if you don't mind? Is this
Yeah, so my driver actually, he was a Seventh Day Adventist when I met him, and so again, that's a works based salvation
right?
that he was believing. And so when I hired him, I also had a house helper, which having a house helper and a driver in South Asia is very common. I wasn't over there living the
We're living the good life.
yeah. So one of the things I did with my house helper and my driver is we would eat lunch together, and have Bible study once a week. And so actually both of them came to know the Lord through our Bible study times. And both of them later told me that, much later, told me that, when we first started the Bible studies, neither one of them liked it. They were not happy about doing it. But
Right.
but yeah, the Lord used His word to draw both of them into salvation. And my driver specifically, I said he was believing in a works based salvation, and the Lord actually one night we were going somewhere and he was having some health problems and he was concerned that he might have cancer. And so he was talking to me about cancer. And I said, Mashum, I said, I don't want this to happen, but what would happen if you died tonight? Where do you think you would go? And he said, Sister, that's a very hard question. And I said, well, it doesn't have to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was on a Thursday night. No, that was on a Wednesday night, and his day off was Thursday. And so I sent him home with some scriptures to read on his day off. And then when he came back into work on Friday, we talked. And as we talked, the Lord just led me to talk about the story of the thief on the cross and how Jesus said, "Today you'll be with me in paradise," and how that man, he didn't do any good works. And because my driver, he was struggling with, he said in our conversation, he was looking at the scribes and the Pharisees in scripture, and he was saying, look at all these good works that they did. And Jesus told them that they weren't even good enough to go to heaven. And so he was like, how could I ever do enough? And so when we talked about that story of the thief on the cross, it was like I could literally see the weight roll off his shoulders and his face just lit up. And then I saw him grow to love the Bible more than any person I know.
Mm-hmm.
And then take that back to his village and start sharing it. So it was an amazing thing what the Lord did in his life.
Yeah. That's amazing. I mean, I think about it's amazing to think about this because and it really just kind of came to mind is you think about Christianity, there's certainty there in terms of the gospel, in terms of Christ's righteousness being imputed on us. When we become Christians, there's a certainty of what our future holds. I really haven't thought about this, but when you think about whether it's Catholicism or Islam or Judaism, there's just no certainty there. There's so much reliance on yourself and what you can do that there's really no. There's. I mean, I was watching a video the other day. It was there were these Jews talking about what heaven is, and it seems you had 5 different Jews. So you got 5 different answers on how you get to heaven and what that's like. There's so much uncertainty, and as a Christian, I think we think a lot about eternity, but maybe there's not that thought process as much in these other religions. They're just thinking about what's next, what do I have to do, what are these things I have to keep doing, and there's no certainty of what their future holds.
Mhm.
So, and I just couldn't imagine living that type of way. So when you say that your driver was asked that question and just said it was a very hard question, he had thought about it apparently and decided he couldn't even come to an answer. It had to be a very freeing experience to then receive the gospel and understand what that means now in light of that. You have any thoughts? Just kind of, I mean, it must have been a freeing experience for both of them, your house helper and your driver.
Yeah. So, I'm just thankful that the Lord allowed me to be a part of it in their lives.
Right. For people that may want to go into missions, that are thinking about it, when you started out going into missions, what were your initial thoughts going in? Do you think that maybe you were was there fear, or was there uncertainty, or were you confident going into it?
Yeah, I mean, I was confident that that was what the Lord had for me in that season of life, just as I'm confident that what I'm doing right now is what the Lord has for me in this season of life.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, it was mostly, I think, excitement and adrenaline, I think which helped in moving to another culture. And, maybe that's one of the Lord's gifts of grace for missionaries is when you're excited about doing something and it helps with some things that could be culture shock.
Right.
But yeah, he just faithfully led me. I knew that, I had a heart for third world countries and to work with women and children. But I thought, well, that doesn't really narrow things down too much. And so when I went to look at, when I was invited to a weekend to look at job openings that the IMB had, I just asked the Lord to make it clear to me where He'd have me go. And I was looking more at a place or a job where I felt like I had gifts that I could meet a need somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I really did feel like it would be in a third world country. And so I got to this weekend, and there were several things that happened that the Lord just used to really confirm
Mm-hmm.
And direct me, and then confirm that this was Him leading. Probably the first thing that happened was locking my keys in my car. Actually, I got to the hotel where we were going to be staying, and the expo was going to be, we'd have to drive to that expo for the weekend back and forth. And somehow I locked my keys in my car when I first got to the hotel. And so thinking like, I'm supposed to be at this expo in, 30 minutes. And what am I going to do? And I was at the front desk in the hotel asking if I had left my keys there. Still was not really sure where the keys were, but just knew I couldn't find them. And the elevator opened, and two of my friends from high school walked off the elevator, and we were both like, "What are you doing here?" And they had done some, like, I think it was a 2-year term in South Asia, and were coming back to go career. And, I had never really thought about South Asia before. And so they're the first ones that kind of put the bug in my ear, like, "Oh, we're going to South Asia. You should come with us." And then, yeah, at the expo, the women were divided into 2 groups to have breakfast with a lady who had been, overseas for a good part of her career. I think both the women there had been overseas for, maybe 15, 20 years. And so one lady had been in Africa all that time, and one lady had been in South Asia.
Did having those conversations with them, was that helpful?
Yes. And so I wanted to be with the lady who had been to Africa.
Right.
But I was placed in the group to hear from the lady from South Asia.
Okay.
And then just looking at those job descriptions too, there actually weren't many jobs open in other parts of the world for single women. But for some reason, South Asia had a lot of job openings for single women. And so I thought, well, just kind of makes sense. Maybe I should look into this more. And as I looked into those jobs more and heard more about South Asia, I thought, I can just really see myself fitting in here, and ended up. And then there was a job that specifically mentioned working with moms and kids. And there weren't any other job openings that specifically mentioned children in the job description. And I know that that's another part of my calling, is that God has called me to work with children. And so the Lord kind of used that. And then on my way back home from that weekend, the Lord brought to mind something else that had happened that summer. This was in the fall. And prior to going to South Asia, I was volunteering at a Korean church in town. And part of what we did was we always highlighted a part of the world that we would pray over. And so over the summer, we had been praying for South Asia, and we had prayer cards that highlighted different cities in South Asia, countries in South Asia, religions in South Asia. And I remember one Sunday that I had read one of those cards, and we were praying over the card, and it was talking about the darkness in South Asia. And I said, "Lord, send me." But I had totally forgot about that after I prayed that prayer. But on the drive back home from that weekend of looking at job openings, the Lord brought that memory to mind. And then, so that was just, I was really thankful for that confirmation and affirmation of His leading me to South Asia. And then I got home, and a few days later, there was a magnet on my refrigerator that I had picked up at North Greenville at a missions fair.
Right.
And, I'd just been on the refrigerator for so long that I kind of, you kind of forget it's there and stop looking at it. But one day after that weekend, I was opening the refrigerator, and that magnet caught my eye, and it said South Asia bound. And so it was just really, I just really was thankful that the Lord gave me that affirmation, both of those things, to affirm, like, yes, I'm leading you to South Asia.
Right. Awesome.
So,
one that I want to get into also what you're doing now. So what you're working on now is you're working with Child Evangelism Fellowship, working with children, and then just go through what you're doing with them and what that ministry's like with Good News Club, and different things, different facets of what that ministry's like.
Okay. Yeah, I work for the Greenville Piedmont chapter, and we cover 4 counties: Greenville, Pickens, Anderson, and Oconee counties. And so what our main ministry is, we partner with churches, with local churches, to go into public schools and to teach Good News Clubs, which It's like a Bible school, except it meets once a week and it meets in the public school. So in 2001, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of CEF and gave us equal access to public schools. And so, it's a huge open door that we have to be in the public school sharing the gospel. And our strategy is to partner with local churches because we not only desire that children are saved and come to know the Lord, but also that they are discipled and established in a local church for Christian living. And so when a church comes in and teaches the club at a school, those children that are unchurched, those families that are unchurched, have a natural connection to a local church.
How many of the schools are y'all located in? Most of the schools within the district?
Almost all of them. I think we have about around 15 schools that we're not in. And actually only 3 of those schools are closed to Good News Club. So the ruling that the Supreme Court gave was if a school is open to any other organization, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, YMCA, anybody else, they have to also be open to Good News Club. So we have 3 schools that are closed to us. We don't know, if they're closed to all organizations because they want to be closed to us, or we don't really know what the reason is.
Right.
But the remaining, 12 or so schools that we have open are open to a church coming in and teaching, but we don't have sponsoring churches willing to go in.
So if a church wants to help get involved in this ministry, what are some ways that the local church can help?
The main thing is we are looking for churches to sponsor these schools, partner with us and sponsor these schools. And so
what does that look like? I guess you're doing that. What does that look like?
So it would mean, having a team of people that would be willing to go in each week. So they meet after school. So usually the clubs start around, 2:10, 2:15 in the afternoon, and you're finished up around 4. I mean, once you usually have a snack time and what we call a grade shepherding time where the kids practice their memory verses, and we take prayer requests from the kids and pray for the kids. And then the club is about an hour long, the teaching time, and then we have dismissal time. So usually, it's around, arriving at the school around 1:45-ish, and finishing up around 4. And so it's a weekly commitment, and the church would work with the school to decide which day of the week you'd want to meet on. That's totally up to the church and the school to decide. And then it's a 1-to-10 ratio as far as adults to children.
Right.
And then that team, we provide the curriculum, but that team would be the ones that would go in and teach it. So there needs to be just some teachers, and then also what we call grade shepherds. So that's the leader of the small groups that we have. And, there's all kinds of ways to be involved. We have prayer coordinators, a snack coordinator, someone who is in charge of the administrative things that need to be keeping the records for the club. And so we really say that, whatever your giftings may be, that you can be used in Good News Club. So it's a huge, we have about 90 clubs going in all 4 counties, and which we're thrilled about, absolutely thrilled about. But we do desire to see every school that's open to us have a club.
Yeah. I imagine that the Good News Club, the fruit you see from that it's incalculable. Just how many kids are being impacted. And I could guarantee that I'm sure that the adults that are helping are being impacted as well. Do y'all have an idea of kind of how many kids, not necessarily may have are being converted, but how many kids are being impacted? I mean, I imagine it's thousands of kids that are reached out every week.
I believe statistics that I've just recently looked at from last year, when things were still, a little bit
shaky with COVID.
Right.
Yeah.
It was over 4,000.
Okay.
In just this area.
Wow.
And about 40% of the kids in Good News Club are unchurched. And so it's not just the Christian kids who sign up for this.
Yeah.
It's a huge, huge open door. I really don't think there's anything else like it. If you want to share the gospel, this is one of the best ways to do it.
Right. I mean, 50 years ago, I feel like almost 100% of the kids may have been churched, but now it's different. And then in the public schools, there isn't that Christian influence that there was a generation ago. So the importance of this ministry is, like we were saying earlier, it's incalculable how important it is to have these kids getting something at school that is Christian based, where they're not, maybe they're not in church, and if they're not church, you have that 40% there. That is extremely important. That's might be the only Christian influence they get all week. So
Exactly.
another thing you were talking about, is there anything you want to add there?
We can just put a link in the show notes to our website.
We will. What we'll do, we'll put a link in the web for the link in the description for that website. And then also you wanted to talk about was an internship program that y'all have for high school students and college students that they can get involved in.
Right. So another one of our main ministries is called Christian Youth in Action. And so I actually was also a part of this program when I was in high school for 3 years. And this program actually was one of the main things that the Lord also used in my life to call me to mission. It was at a CEF or Christian Youth in Action training camp that the speaker that spoke that week, he spoke a lot from John Piper's book, Let the Nations Be Glad. And the Lord really used that week at that training camp and those messages to kind of reshape my thinking even about missions, that it's not primarily about reaching the lost, it's primarily about God's glory. And so that was very impactful. And then the training that CEF gives is, I have a Christian studies degree from North Greenville. I've been to seminary, but the training that CEF gives is the best training I've ever received. It's the most practical. I've used it more than any other training I've received. I used the training with CEF more than the training that I have received anywhere else. So they just do an excellent job training. And so the internship that we offer in the summer is for 15 to 22-year-olds, and it's a 6-week commitment. So 1 week of training school at Columbia International University. And all the students are brought together from all over South Carolina for that training school. And then it's 5 weeks of doing backyard Bible clubs in our local community. And so they go out and do 3 clubs a day. And
is that separate from the school? That's something that
this is called a 5-day club.
Okay.
Okay. So it's a backyard Bible club, and it meets 5 days in a row instead of once a week. But the youth are trained in how to share the gospel and then how to counsel children for salvation. And it's just, if you can share the gospel with a child, then you're equipped to share the gospel with anyone. And so, when I went through the training, I believed the gospel, but I wouldn't say that I really understood it and how all the pieces fit together. And so CEF really helped me to make those connections and then equipped me to be able to explain it clearly to others.
Yeah.
And so, these youth and students that come for the Christian Youth in Action program, they get this training and then they're mentored throughout the summer as well, and discipled. And then they have just, an awesome opportunity to be a witness in their community and to lead children to Christ. And so, and the way that we do it is it's never a, raise your hand and repeat a prayer after me kind of thing. We train everyone who's teaching with CEF, working with CEF to counsel children and to really try to find out as far as a human can,
right.
Does this child understand? And does this child believe?
Right.
And so I love the training that CEF offers, and the Christian Youth in Action program was life-changing for me. And so we're taking applications now, and that's also, the application is available on our website. And of course, anyone could feel free to call our office. And if they had questions or, wanted to talk more about what that program is. But it's a paid job for the summer. So,
wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it goes the whole summer and it is paid. So it's a paid internship. Okay.
Yeah. It starts about mid-June and goes to the end of July.
Okay. We'll also put a link for that in the description as well, just in case anyone was interested in that. Yeah. That's really cool and a great opportunity for people to learn how to share the gospel. I agree 100%. If you can share the gospel with a kid, I forget who said it. There's a statement said that if you can't explain something to a 10-year-old, do you really understand?
Right, yeah.
So it's kind of like that. I mean, if you
yeah.
truly understand the gospel, can you explain it to someone that's young? So I agree with that's 100% the case. That's a really good opportunity. Anything else maybe that you want to highlight about CEF that they're doing right now in the community, or maybe just nationwide, or anything else you wanted to highlight?
Yeah. So in the spring, we are going to be partnering with a crusade called Go Tell America. So they'll be in the Pickens area.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'll be at the crusade doing face painting and sharing the gospel with kids. Again, one of the big things that CEF uses to share the gospel is the wordless book, which is using the colors to share the gospel. A lot of people maybe are more familiar with the bracelets, but the idea would be we'll be using those 5 colors and doing face painting with the 5 colors and then sharing the gospel with the kids while they're getting their face painted.
Right.
So we're really excited about that opportunity as well.
Yeah, that's really good. Is that something that local churches can help out with, or is that something that how can they get involved?
Yeah, I mean,
there?
if people want to come and paint faces, we would love to have volunteers because we are expecting about 1,000 families to
Wow.
be at the crusade. So we do
Wow.
need some hands.
Awesome.
And the face painting, it's not anything really elaborate, and so and there would be training. So somebody doesn't have to be an artist to help out.
Right.
They're pretty basic designs, and like I said, there'd be training.
Right. That's awesome. You've been there for about a year now,
Mhm.
right? So
Yeah.
it's cool to see. It's cool to see that God's working in multiple areas in multiple areas of your life. Do you feel that that's something you want to stick around doing? Do you know if missions is ever something that's maybe in your future again?
You mean overseas missions?
Going back.
I mean, I think it's hard for me to imagine living in America for the rest of my life.
Right.
So I really love Asia, and I do miss being in Asia.
Right.
But like I said, I'm 100% confident that the same way that the Lord clearly led me to South Asia, He clearly led me to CEF for this season of life, and so I'm so thankful that I have that confidence to know that I'm in His will and I'm doing what He wants me to do right now.
Right.
So,
Yeah, and a lot of that is, I guess, knowing that you're in God's will I guess, is done through prayer and, of course, Scripture. But there's a confidence that God lays in your heart that what you're doing is right, and I guess He opens the doors. Would you say that's been the case for you, and kind of determining what God's will is for your life?
right. Yeah. I mean, what led me to this job with CEF was being in South Asia during all the COVID lockdowns was
Mhm.
really difficult. It was very isolating. And I was living by myself. And I really couldn't do very much at all. And so it's kind of like, why am I here? And so just, some discouragement. And so after this was in 2021, so things were kind of back to normal in America, or getting back to normal. And over in South Asia, the Delta variant was raging. Anyways, I decided that actually a friend of mine had wrote me an email during that time, and she shared with me about a 5-day club that she had that summer in her neighborhood. This friend was from Kentucky. But she sent pictures and shared about that 5-day club. And it started me thinking that, well, if I go back to America this fall, I could volunteer with Good News Club, and I could actually do something, and I could do something that I really love. Because prior to going overseas, I was volunteering with Good News Club. And so I've been connected with CEF since high school, off and on. And so I decided, just after being in lockdown for 5 months, that I just needed to step back from that situation. And so I came back to America in the fall of 2021, and I volunteered in Good News Club, and was just during that time really affirmed in my giftings. And it almost got to be funny how many people were saying, "Oh, have you ever thought about working for CEF? You'd be so good at CEF." And it just everywhere I turned, people were saying these kind of things to me. But I also knew that there was no job openings in the office in Greenville. And I knew that I wasn't at a place emotionally that I could move somewhere else. Just from being in so much isolation, I was like, I don't have it in me to move somewhere new and start over right now. And so, but yeah, I just kept praying and decided that even though there were no openings in the office in Greenville, that I would submit a resume. And so I did that at the end of 2021. And I thought, well, that's that. And, just didn't think anything would come of it really.
Right.
But kept praying and feeling like the Lord was leading me to resign with the IMB. And so I did that on a Tuesday night in January. That Friday, CEF contacted me and said, we unexpectedly have a job open.
Wow.
And so, not
but a couple of days after.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, only the Lord could have timed all that
Mm-hmm.
and moved all those pieces at the right time. There was a girl on staff with CEF who was from Charlotte, and her family was going through some things, and she just felt like she needed to get back to Charlotte, but she didn't see that coming, and I didn't see, a few months ahead of time. I didn't know what was coming in my life either, and so just really neat to see the Lord's hand in
Right.
that, and again, like to know, like, okay, I was really hearing from you, Lord. I wasn't making an emotional decision. This really was you leading me to resign and to put in my resume with CEF. So yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I really, really appreciate you coming on. Thank you for coming and sharing your story. It's fascinating to see God work in people's lives, and I know that you've talked about God working in your life in so many different areas. So thank you for coming and sharing your story, and we really, really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I'm Wilson Paris, and that's a good word.